Really? That's the effort we're getting? That's the effort y'all are gonna give the fans that paid nearly $400 for a ticket. That's the embarrassing, piss poor effort y'all are going to give them in an all-star game. At this game, cancel the all-star game. At this rate, cancel the all-star game, name people all-stars, mail them an award, and keep the regular season going. This is trash. This is straight up.
The 2026 WNBA All-Star Weekend was supposed to be a celebration. Not just any celebration, the kind that gets written into sports history books. Corporate sponsors had poured over $10 million into production budgets. Broadcast networks had spent months building anticipation across every platform imaginable. And dedicated fans had stretched their budgets to the absolute limit just to be in the building. Nosebleed seats were going for $400. Floor tickets were selling for numbers that would make your jaw drop. People flew in from across the country. They booked hotels. They rearranged work schedules. They brought their kids. All of it, every single dollar, every sacrifice, every hour of anticipation was built on one simple promise: that the best women's basketball players on the planet were going to show up and actually play. That promise lasted about 45 seconds after tip-off. The moment the opening possession unfolded, something felt deeply wrong. The energy was flat. The effort was almost non-existent. Veterans who had spent weeks on social media hyping up the event were now jogging through place like they were running a light shoot-around before a practice nobody actually wanted to attend. The crowd, which had been buzzing with genuine excitement just minutes earlier, started going quiet. Not in the respectful, focused way a crowd goes quiet during a tense playoff moment, in the confused, uncomfortable way that tells you something has gone very wrong and nobody knows how to react. Television audiences who had tuned in expecting a showcase of elite athletic competition were already reaching for their remotes. And right in the middle of all of it, one player was watching everything unfold with an expression that could only be described as barely contained fury. Caitlin Clark had not flown in, suited up, and shattered a scoring record just to stand next to people who couldn't be bothered to try. And she was about to make absolutely sure the entire world knew it. To really understand what pushed Clark over the edge, you have to understand the specific kind of failure that was unfolding in front of her. This wasn't a situation where players were trying hard and simply having an off night. Every athlete has off nights. Every competitor understands that the ball doesn't always fall your way, that your shot isn't always on, that some games just don't click. That's basketball. Nobody in that arena would have walked away angry over an honest, competitive effort that just didn't produce highlights. What was happening on that floor was something entirely different. It was indifference. Pure, visible, almost aggressive indifference toward the fans who had paid a premium to be there. While Clark was sprinting through off-ball screens, diving for loose balls, and treating every possession like it had playoff implications, a significant portion of the veteran roster was operating at somewhere around 50% effort, and that might be generous. The contrast wasn't subtle. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd only notice if you were watching closely with an analytical eye. It was glaring. It was uncomfortable. It was the kind of thing that makes you feel secondhand embarrassment for the people in the building who spent real money expecting something real in return. And no single moment in that first half crystallized the problem more clearly than what Angel Reese put on display. What happened with Reese wasn't a matter of a difficult shot rimming out or a defensive breakdown that led to an easy basket for the other team. We're talking about wide-open, uncontested layups, the most fundamental play in basketball, falling completely short of the rim on back-to-back possessions. Clear catches in the paint with no defender within 5 feet converted into rushed, fumbled attempts that didn't come close. The crowd didn't boo. They went silent. That silence was somehow worse. Commentators tried to keep things light, laughing it off as all-star rust, chalking it up to the casual nature of exhibition basketball. But the people sitting in those $400 seats weren't laughing. And on the Indiana Fever bench, Caitlin Clark was not laughing either. Every missed layup, every lazy jog back on defense while the opposing team converted an easy transition bucket, every possession that felt like it was being treated as an inconvenient interruption to whatever else these players would rather be doing. Clark absorbed all of it. The frustration was building in real time, visible to anyone paying attention, and everyone in that building could sense that it was only a matter of time before something gave way.
Look like Caitlin Clark is going to get the last laugh today during the WNBA All-Star Game. Now, I watched some of this game, and I have to be honest with you. It is boring. It is just boring. You can tell the players ain't playing for real. You can tell that they really ain't into it. And at this point, for the WNBA to already be kind of struggling with ratings, you would think that they would have made it their mission to go out there and put on for the fans. And unfortunately, we did not get that today. They're not putting...
What happened next had genuinely never occurred before in the history of All-Star basketball. Not like this. Not on a live broadcast in front of millions of viewers, with a microphone in her face and an entire league's reputation on the line. Before the halftime horn even sounded, Caitlin Clark looked directly into the camera and said what everyone in that arena was already thinking. She didn't dress it up. She didn't soften the edges or wrap it in diplomatic language designed to protect feelings and avoid headlines. She said, plainly and without hesitation, that the fans had paid too much money to come through that door and watch players walk around. She made it clear that nobody needed to go 100%. This was an all-star game, not a playoff series, but that there was an enormous gap between maximum effort and what had been on display. She called on her teammates to pick it up, to show some respect, to give the people who saved up and showed up something worth remembering. And critically, the moment wasn't vague or general. Witnesses in the building confirmed that Clark pointed directly at specific players. This was not a motivational speech for the locker room. This was a public accountability moment, broadcast to everyone watching at home, and it landed like a thunderclap. The reason that moment hit so differently than a standard halftime pep talk is because of what it represented. Athletes at Clark's level are surrounded at all times by systems specifically designed to prevent exactly what she just did. Public relations teams exist to manage messaging. Coaches deliver the hard conversations behind closed doors. Veteran players police the locker room culture from the inside. The unspoken rule in professional sports is that you handle your business internally, you present a unified front to the public, and you never, under any circumstances, use a live microphone to tell the world that your teammates aren't trying. Clark didn't just bend that rule. She walked up to it, looked it directly in the eye, and completely ignored it. And the reason she did it wasn't ego, it was the fans. She said it herself. The fans paid a lot of money to get in the door. Here's where the story takes a turn that nobody could have scripted. Instead of retreating after her on-camera call-out, instead of pulling back and letting the moment pass, Clark did what Caitlin Clark always does when the pressure is highest. She went to work. She took over that basketball game in a way that made everything else happening on the floor look like it was from a different sport entirely. Pulling up from 5 feet behind the logo, firing passes through gaps that most players don't even see, creating her own shot against any coverage the defense threw at her. She was not playing all-star basketball. She was playing elimination round basketball in an exhibition setting because that is the only gear she has. By the time the final buzzer sounded, Caitlin had put up 45 points and a double-double in under 30 minutes of action. Let that settle for a second. 45 points in 30 minutes in a game where she was playing alongside people who couldn't convert uncontested layups. The previous All-Star scoring record had stood for years, and Clark didn't just approach it, she ran past it and kept going. Basketball analysts watching from the press box were quietly doing the math on what the final number would have looked like if she'd played a full allotment of minutes. The consensus was somewhere north of 60. She was doing whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted, against whoever was put in front of her, and the defense had absolutely no answer. But here's the detail that tells you everything you need to know about the environment Clark is operating in. In the middle of All-Star Weekend, with Clark's performance dominating conversation everywhere, WNBA players were asked a simple question on camera. Marina Mabrey had recently tied the all-time WNBA single-game scoring record at 53 points. Which current player, reporters asked, do you think is going to break it? Player after player answered: Asia Wilson, Paige Bakers, Olivia Miles, Stewie, Marina herself. One player even said she'd bet on herself. Not a single one of them said Caitlin Clark. Not one. The woman who had just dropped 45 points in 30 minutes of all-star action, on pace to absolutely demolish that record if given the time, was completely invisible in the answers of her peers. You can decide for yourself whether that was an oversight or a statement. The press conference that followed Clark's breakthrough performance was supposed to be a celebration. The league's PR infrastructure was fully prepared for a standard post-game session. A few questions about the scoring record, some talk about team chemistry, the usual carefully managed celebration of a big individual moment. What they got instead was something they will be processing for a long time.
Clark bypassed the standard photo opportunities. She walked past the handlers, she took the podium, looked out at the assembled media, and proceeded to say publicly what she had apparently been saying privately for much longer. The all-star performance, she made clear, was a betrayal, not of the league's image or its broadcast partners or its corporate sponsors, though all of those things were certainly damaged, a betrayal of the fans, the people who had scraped together $400 for seats in the upper deck, the families who had driven hours to be in the building, the viewers at home who had genuinely believed that the women they were watching cared as much about the game as they did. Clark called out the locker room culture in terms that left no room for interpretation. She named the passive-aggressive veteran resentment that had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. She addressed the complete absence of accountability from coaching staff who watched the effort level crater in real time and said nothing. She described players who treat all-star selection as a reward to be collected rather than a responsibility to be honored. The press room was dead silent, not because the reporters didn't have questions, they had plenty, but because nobody had ever heard a player of Clark's stature say these things out loud, in public, while the cameras were still rolling. The WNBA's carefully constructed public image had just taken a direct hit from its own biggest star, and there was absolutely nothing the league's communications team could do about it. What made it even more devastating was the context around ticket pricing that Clark didn't need to state explicitly. Everyone already knew it. Before Clark entered the league, a WNBA All-Star ticket could be had for $30. $30! The year she was injured and missed significant time, prices dipped back to around $71. In her third year, with Clark fully healthy and dominating, the floor price for entry had climbed to nearly $400. The league had monetized her presence in ways that benefited every franchise, every executive, every broadcast deal, and every sponsor. And in return, the product put on the floor for the fans who made those prices possible was missed layups, lazy defense, and players who couldn't be bothered to jog back on a fast break. Clark understood the transaction, clearly. The fans had held up their end, the league had not. The press conference was not the end of it, not even close. Hours after the final buzzer, while the arena was still emptying out and the highlight packages were being assembled, something happened inside the private corridors of the venue that sent genuine shockwaves through the WNBA's front office. According to multiple sources who confirmed details of the meeting to reporters covering the league, Clark went directly to league executives in a tunnel meeting that lasted well past midnight. And what she delivered in that room was not a complaint. It was an ultimatum. The terms, as they leaked out in the following hours, were remarkably specific. Clark made clear that she had no interest in continuing to participate in all-star events that generated the viewership and ticket revenue that funded the entire operation, if the league refused to address its roster priorities. She was not going to be the one player giving maximum effort while veterans collected appearance fees and jogged through possessions.
She was not going to be the face of a product that disrespected its own audience, and if the WNBA wanted her continued participation in exhibition events and the television ratings that came with it, they needed to make an immediate change. They needed to bring in Sophie Cunningham. The demand caught executives off guard, not because it was unreasonable, but because of how precisely it identified exactly what the league had been getting wrong. Cunningham, the Phoenix enforcer, represented everything that had been systematically undervalued by the WNBA's corporate political machine. She is not a player who jogs back on defense. She is not a player who treats an uncontested layup as optional. She plays with a physicality and an intensity that makes every possession feel contested, every game feel meaningful, and every fan feel like they got something real for their money. She had been routinely passed over in favor of players with larger social media followings and more marketable personalities, despite consistently being the kind of competitor that makes teams harder to play against and games more worth watching. Clark's point was not subtle. If you want to fix what's broken about this league's on-court culture, you start by surrounding the players who actually try with more players who actually try. Cunningham wasn't a personal preference. She was a symbol of the exact values the All-Star roster had just spent an entire game demonstrating it lacked.
The WNBA's front office found itself in a position it had never been in before, and the walls were closing in from every direction. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. Studies and broadcast analyses had consistently shown that Clark's presence drives somewhere in the range of 70% or more of the league's television viewership. Ticket prices had nearly tripled since she entered the league. Global sponsorship interest, which had been modest for years, had exploded in direct correlation with her rise. The league had, in effect, built its entire growth narrative around one player's shoulders, and that player was now publicly saying the product wasn't good enough and privately threatening to reduce her involvement if nothing changed. Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, who had spent years carefully navigating the league's expansion and its complicated relationship with its own biggest star, was backed into a corner with no clean exit. Agreeing to Clark's demands publicly would confirm that the league's veteran culture had a serious problem, which the All-Star Game had already made obvious to anyone watching. Dismissing the demands would risk alienating the one player whose presence was keeping the entire financial structure intact. And doing nothing, the most tempting option for any bureaucratic institution facing an uncomfortable truth, would guarantee that the next All-Star Weekend would play out exactly the same way, with the same disappointing effort, the same angry fans, and the same growing gap between what the league promises and what it actually delivers. The veteran players who had spent years making Clark's professional life difficult through passive aggression, subtle exclusions, and the kind of petty political games that never quite make headlines, they had miscalculated badly. The strategy of freezing her out, of making her feel unwelcome in locker rooms and invisible in peer recognition, had operated on the assumption that Clark needed the WNBA more than the WNBA needed Clark. The All-Star Weekend made it impossible to maintain that fiction any longer. Without her, the cameras go away. Without the cameras, the sponsors go away. Without the sponsors, the salaries that fund the careers of every player in the league, veterans included, become impossible to sustain. There is a moment in every significant cultural shift when the balance of power tips and everyone in the room suddenly understands that nothing is going to go back to the way it was. The 2026 WNBA All-Star Weekend was that moment for women's professional basketball. Not because of the scoring record, though that was remarkable. Not because of the press conference, though that was historic. But because of what the combination of all of it revealed about where the league actually stands and who holds the real leverage within it. The old guard had spent years constructing a version of the WNBA's story in which Caitlin Clark was a temporary phenomenon, a popular player who would eventually settle into the league's existing hierarchy and learn to play by its unwritten rules. The scoring record question, where player after player refused to acknowledge that the woman who had just put up 45 points in 30 minutes might be capable of breaking the all-time mark, was a perfect window into that mentality. It wasn't about basketball analytics, it was about a culture that had decided collectively that certain players were to be seen and not fully acknowledged, regardless of what the evidence on the floor was saying. Clark's response to that culture was not anger, at least not in the way her critics expected. It was performance, it was accountability, it was the willingness to stand in front of a microphone and say the things that everyone in the building already knew, but nobody with anything to lose was willing to say. She didn't do it for the headlines, she did it because $400 is real money to real people, and those real people deserved better than what they got. The WNBA has a choice to make, not just about Sophie Cunningham, not just about all-star rosters, but about what kind of league it wants to be and who it wants to be built around. It can continue operating as a system that rewards political maneuvering and punishes honest accountability, or it can build something worthy of the fan base that Clark has helped create. The era of players staying silent while the product suffers and the audience pays the price is over. Caitlin Clark made sure of that, and the question now isn't whether things are going to change, the question is whether the people running the league are going to get ahead of that change or get run over by it.